I was out for my friend's birthday party, and the night had been a whirlwind of laughter, music, and drinks. As the clock struck 2 a.m., I decided it was time to head home. I was more than a little tipsy, but I convinced myself I could make it back in my trusty Toyota Camry 2008. The winding road seemed endless, and the darkness outside only added to the sense of isolation. My eyelids drooped, and the alcohol coursing through my veins blurred my judgment. I should have pulled over and taken a nap, but I was determined to reach home, and that was my first mistake. As I drove deeper into the night, the gas gauge taunted me, inching closer to empty. Panic gripped me as I scanned the surroundings for a gas station, but all I saw were ominous, shadowy woods that stretched into the inky darkness. My heart raced as the needle dipped perilously into the dreaded red zone. The engine sputtered, and with one final gasp, it fell silent. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, alone and shrouded in darkness. The deafening silence outside was only broken by the sound of my own shaky breath. Fear clawed at me as I tried to reach for my phone, but to my dismay, it displayed no signal. My surroundings felt eerie, and I locked the car doors, huddling in the driver's seat for safety. I was alone, isolated, and absolutely terrified. Hours passed, and I was caught in a perpetual state of dread. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl sent shivers down my spine. I watched the woods just beyond the road with a gnawing sense of unease. Something wasn't right, and I could feel it in the air. It was when the clock struck 3 a.m. that I noticed it, a shadowy figure moving in the woods. I watched in paralyzed horror as it drew closer, taking slow and deliberate steps towards my car. My heart raced as fear began to strangle me. The figure approached, its face shrouded in darkness, and I could see nothing but two cold, unrelenting eyes. I tried to start the car, but it refused to respond, and that's when the sinister voice, chilling and low, pierced the air. "Come out." The voice sent a shiver down my spine, and I knew I had to flee. I flung open the car door and sprinted into the darkness, my feet stumbling over uneven ground, heart pounding louder than my footsteps. The menacing voice pursued me, whispering threats and curses that seemed to echo through the trees. I was in a state of drunken panic, and I knew I had to put distance between me and my pursuer. Time lost all meaning as I ran, and the woods seemed to stretch on infinitely. The sinister whispers grew louder, and it was clear that my pursuer was closing in. My breaths came in ragged gasps, and I could feel my strength waning. It was only a matter of time before he caught up with me. Just when I felt I couldn't go on any longer, I stumbled into a clearing. The moonlight bathed the area in a pale, silvery glow, revealing a small, desolate cabin. Without thinking, I dashed inside, barricading the door with a nearby table. Trapped in the eerie cabin, I listened to the sinister voice as it continued its menacing whispers, taunting me from outside. I dared not make a sound, for fear that it would give away my location. Exhaustion eventually overcame me, and I drifted into a restless sleep. The night was filled with haunting dreams of the sinister figure and his malevolent whispers. I awoke with a start as the dawn's light filtered through the cabin's windows. The sinister presence seemed to have retreated, and it was finally safe to leave. I made my way back to the road, my body battered and bruised, and hitched a ride to where I had left my Toyota Camry. The sun had risen, and the world seemed strangely ordinary, as if the horrors of the night had been nothing more than a nightmare. But as I approached the spot where I had run out of gas, my heart sank. My car was gone. There was no trace of it. I couldn't fathom how it had disappeared in the few hours I had been away. To this day, I have no answers. My car, along with the terrors of that night, remains a mystery. I never saw the sinister figure again, and I have no clue who could have taken my car, especially when it had run out of gas. The events of that night continue to haunt me, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved, and some horrors are best left in the shadows. It was a gloomy Tuesday morning when I arrived at Marshwood High School. The rain had been falling relentlessly, adding an eerie atmosphere to an already unsettling day. I was a senior, and the prospect of graduation was the only thing keeping me going. Little did I know that this day would turn into a harrowing experience that would forever alter my life. The school day began as usual, with students shuffling to their classes and teachers droning on about algebra and history. But something felt off, a sense of unease that hung in the air like a thick fog. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the feeling gnawed at me, making it difficult to focus on my studies. As the minutes ticked by, that feeling of unease grew stronger. I noticed my classmates exchanging worried glances, and the whispers in the hallways became more hushed. It was as if a dark secret loomed over the school, a secret that everyone was afraid to acknowledge. Then, it happened. An ear-piercing alarm blared throughout the school, causing everyone to jump in their seats. The intercom crackled to life, and the principal's voice came through, trembling with anxiety. "Attention, everyone. We are initiating a lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. All students and staff, please proceed to the nearest classroom or office immediately. Lock all doors, turn off the lights, and remain silent. Do not open the doors for anyone." Panic spread through the classroom like wildfire. The teacher hurriedly guided us into a small, windowless room, which served as a storage closet. It was cramped, and the walls seemed to close in on us. As the teacher locked the door and turned off the lights, the reality of the situation sank in. No one knew what was happening. All we had to go on were the cryptic words from the intercom. Why were we in a lockdown? Who or what were we hiding from? The questions raced through my mind, but there were no answers. The minutes turned into hours, and the sense of dread only deepened. The silence in the room was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our shallow breaths and the muffled sobs of frightened students. We had no way to communicate with the outside world. Our cell phones were useless, the signal jammed or blocked, and there was no Wi-Fi connection. As time dragged on, our imaginations began to run wild. Every creak, every distant sound, became a potential threat. I couldn't help but think of all the horror stories I'd heard about school shootings, about students barricading themselves in classrooms while danger lurked just outside. The fear was paralyzing. We huddled together in the darkness, clutching our backpacks and textbooks as if they were our lifelines. The hours stretched into an agonizing eternity, and it felt as though the world outside had ceased to exist. I thought of my family, my friends, and the life I had taken for granted. The unknown had a way of stripping away the facade of safety and revealing the fragility of our existence. Then, a faint sound, so soft that I almost didn't hear it, cut through the silence. It was a whisper, coming from the corner of the room. I strained to listen, and a chill ran down my spine as I realized that someone was sobbing. The whispering grew louder, and I could make out the words. "They're out there. Something's out there," a trembling voice said. Panic spread through our group like wildfire. The fear was contagious, and we were trapped in that small, dark room with no way to escape. Desperation set in, and some students began to pound on the door, demanding answers, demanding to be let out. But the teacher, a middle-aged woman with a look of terror in her eyes, implored us to remain silent and stay put. She said it was for our own safety, that we didn't know what was happening outside, and it was better to stay hidden. Hours turned into days, or at least it felt that way. We were running out of food and water, and the stench of fear and anxiety hung in the air. Some students had succumbed to panic, and the room had become a prison of torment and despair. As we huddled together in the darkness, a strange realization dawned on me. The daylight that had once streamed through the window had vanished, replaced by an unending night. I looked at my watch, but it had stopped ticking. It was as if time itself had come to a standstill, and we were trapped in a never-ending lockdown. The teacher, her face etched with exhaustion and fear, had lost all hope. She no longer tried to console us or offer words of reassurance. It was as if she had resigned herself to our grim fate. With each passing moment, the darkness outside the door seemed to grow thicker, as if it were alive, pressing in on us. The whispering had ceased, replaced by a heavy silence that was broken only by the occasional muffled sob. I thought of my family, my friends, and all the dreams I had once harbored. They felt like distant memories, fading into the void. I wondered if they were out there somewhere, searching for me, or if they had given up hope, believing that I was lost forever. Days turned into weeks, and our situation became increasingly dire. The supplies had dwindled to nothing, and hunger gnawed at our stomachs. Some students had grown weak, while others had succumbed to madness, their eyes vacant and unseeing. The teacher, too, had changed. She had become a shell of her former self, muttering to herself incoherently. It was as if the unending darkness had taken a toll on her sanity. Then one day, as I sat in the corner, lost in my thoughts, I heard a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. It was a faint scratching coming from the door. I turned to look, my heart pounding in my chest. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, as if something were trying to claw its way into the room. I felt a rising sense of dread as the door shook with each impact. The other students began to panic, their voices rising in terror. The teacher, her eyes wide with fear, rushed to the door and began frantically pounding on it, shouting for help. But the door held, and the scratching continued. I watched in horror as the door began to splinter, and a crack of light appeared. It was as if the darkness outside was trying to force its way in, to consume us. I knew that whatever was on the other side was not human, that it was something otherworldly and malevolent. The crack of light grew wider, and I caught a glimpse of what lay beyond. It was a swirling, chaotic void, a maelstrom of darkness that defied comprehension. I could feel its pull, its hunger, and I knew that it would not stop until it had devoured us all. In that moment, I made a choice. I knew that there was no escape, that our fate was sealed. But I would not let the darkness take me without a fight. I would not go down without a struggle. I grabbed a shard of glass from a broken window and lunged at the door, using all my strength to drive it back. The darkness roared in frustration, and the door slammed shut with a final, resounding thud. I turned to the others, my heart pounding, and I saw the glimmer of hope in their eyes. We were not going to surrender to the darkness. We would fight to the end, whatever that end may be. As we huddled together in that small dark room, the hours turned into days, and the days turned into weeks. We were trapped in a never-ending lockdown, a nightmare from which there was no escape. But we were not alone, and we were not without hope. We would face the darkness together, united in our determination to survive. And as the scratching on the door continued, we knew that the battle was far from over. It was Halloween night, and the air was thick with anticipation and the promise of sugar highs. My 3 friends, Alex, Lisa, and Mike, and I, had made a pact to make this Halloween unforgettable. We decided to go trick-or-treating in the neighborhood around 1 a.m. It was a dare, an adventure we couldn't resist. The town was eerily quiet, with only the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. Street lamps cast long, eerie shadows, and the full moon loomed in the sky, adding to the spine-tingling atmosphere. Dressed as a zombie, I felt the chill down my spine as we turned the corner onto a dimly lit street that seemed to belong to another time. The ominous street was lined with ancient, gnarled trees, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. It was said that this neighborhood had seen its share of strange happenings, but that only fueled our excitement. Lisa, dressed as a wicked witch, had heard the tale of an old man who lived in a decrepit house at the end of the street, a man who never participated in Halloween festivities and was known to be reclusive and eerie. As we neared the end of the street, the house in question came into view. It was a dilapidated structure with peeling paint and overgrown thorny bushes that reached out to snag at our costumes. All the windows were dark, save for one on the ground floor, where a dim, flickering light could be seen. The conversation turned to the creepy man who lived there. Mike, dressed as a vampire, had heard that he was some sort of recluse, and nobody knew much about him. There were tales of children disappearing on Halloween night and never being seen again. Whether it was fact or fiction, we were about to find out. Our determination to face our fears overcame the initial reluctance. As we approached the front gate, I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. The wrought iron gate creaked as I pushed it open, and we made our way to the front door. The cracked stone path leading to it was lined with brittle leaves and fallen branches, which crunched beneath our feet. We reached the door, and I exchanged nervous glances with my friends. There was a long moment of hesitation before Alex, dressed as a werewolf, rang the doorbell. A heavy silence followed, and we were just about to turn and flee when the door swung open with a slow, eerie creak. Standing in the doorway was a man who appeared as though he had stepped out of a horror movie. His clothes were ragged and dirty, and his wild, unkempt hair clung to his haggard face. His eyes were sunken, and they stared at us with an unsettling intensity. "Trick or treat," Mike stammered, holding out his bag for candy. The man said nothing, just continued to fix us with that unblinking gaze. Lisa, with a quiver in her voice, piped up, "Are you okay, mister?" Finally, the man's lips curled into a grotesque smile. "Oh, I'm more than okay. Won't you come in and join me for a while?" The invitation took us by surprise, and a tense silence hung in the air. There was an unspoken understanding among us that something about this situation wasn't right. But the lure of a genuine Halloween thrill overpowered our fear. Reluctantly, we stepped over the threshold and into the man's dimly lit home. The foyer was filled with cobwebs, and a musty smell permeated the air. The man led us deeper into the house, and I couldn't help but notice that the flickering candlelight cast long, eerie shadows on the walls. As we entered the living room, it became evident that this place was a haven for the bizarre. Antique furniture covered in dusty cloths lined the room, and strange, esoteric symbols were etched into the wooden floor. It was clear that this man was no ordinary recluse. Our unease grew as we took our seats on a tattered sofa. The man, whose name we still did not know, began to tell us an odd and unsettling story about a curse that had plagued his family for generations. He spoke of rituals and otherworldly beings that were bound to this very house. It was then that I realized we had made a grave mistake. This was no ordinary Halloween thrill. This was a descent into madness. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier, and I could feel a sense of impending doom wash over us. Suddenly, the man's demeanor changed. His smile widened, and his eyes gleamed with an unsettling malevolence. "You see, the curse requires a new set of souls to continue its existence. You have unwittingly become part of the ritual." With those words, he lunged at us, revealing that he was not as feeble as he had appeared. Panic set in as we scrambled to our feet, attempting to escape the room. But the man was too fast, and he overpowered us with an unnatural strength. Lisa's scream pierced the air as he dragged her away, and my heart pounded in my chest. I could hear the others struggling, and in that moment, I realized we were in grave danger. The man's intentions were clear. He intended to kidnap us and use our souls in some unspeakable ritual. We fought with everything we had, but it was futile. The man was relentless, and his grip was unbreakable. He was about to drag us into a hidden passage when a loud banging erupted at the front door. The sound of sirens pierced the night, and the man's grip faltered for a moment. Realization hit us like a ton of bricks. Our parents had discovered our absence and called the police. The man was now faced with a choice: release us and face the consequences, or continue with his sinister plan. He chose the former, shoving us into the hidden passage and sealing it behind us. In the dark, cramped space, we huddled together, gasping for breath and shaking with fear. The sounds of a struggle and police commands echoed through the house, and it became clear that the man was being arrested, but we were still trapped, with no way to escape. Hours passed, and it felt like an eternity in that suffocating darkness. Finally, a muffled voice reached our ears. It was a police officer who had discovered the hidden passage. With trembling hands, we crawled out, disheveled and terrified. The police took our statements and assured us that the man would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Our parents arrived, their faces etched with relief and worry, and we were enveloped in their loving arms. It was a nightmarish Halloween we would never forget. In the aftermath of that harrowing Halloween night, we learned that the man had indeed been involved in dark, occult practices. He had been kidnapping children for years, attempting to use their souls in rituals to maintain his unnatural existence. We were fortunate to have escaped his clutches, but the horror of that night would haunt our dreams for years to come. The incident had a lasting impact on us. It's been 6 years since the incident took place.
Jessie had recently moved into a quaint 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, excited to begin a new chapter in her life. The house was cozy, and Jessie felt a sense of tranquility within its walls. However, that peace would soon be shattered by the chilling discovery she was about to make. The first few weeks in the house went by smoothly. Jessie had unpacked her belongings and settled into her new routine. Yet, something always felt a bit off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but the unease lingered. One hot summer evening, Jessie decided to turn on the air conditioning to escape the sweltering heat. To her dismay, nothing happened. She fiddled with the thermostat and checked the vents, but the cool relief she sought eluded her. The air vents were silent, as if they were not connected to the system at all. Frustrated and perspiring in the stifling heat, Jessie decided to investigate further. Armed with a flashlight, she headed to the basement to inspect the furnace and AC unit. As she descended the creaking stairs, she noticed an unusual smell, a mix of decay and something more unpleasant, something she couldn't quite place. When she reached the basement, she was shocked to find that the furnace was in perfect working condition, the AC unit as well. Puzzled, she began tracing the ducts that led to the vents throughout the house. As she inspected one of the ducts, her flashlight's beam revealed something chilling. Peering into the duct, Jessie saw a pair of eyes staring back at her. The eyes were wild and filled with fear. Her heart raced as she realized there was a man living in the walls of her house. A wave of terror washed over her and she stumbled backward in shock. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Jessie stammered, her voice trembling. The man in the duct looked malnourished and frightened. "Please don't call the police, I'm starving," he whispered. Jessie's concern for the man overcame her initial fear. She cautiously approached the duct, keeping her distance. "Why are you in my walls? How did you get here?" The man explained that he had been homeless and desperate, seeking shelter in the abandoned house before Jessie moved in. He had managed to access the vents, creating a hidden enclave within the walls. Desperation had driven him to sneak into the house when Jessie wasn't around, stealing food and water from the kitchen to survive. Jessie, torn between compassion and fear, contemplated her options. She couldn't let this stranger continue to live within her walls, but she also couldn't turn him over to the authorities without feeling a deep sense of guilt. After a long conversation, they reached a compromise. Jessie provided the man with food, water, and a warm blanket, but only on the condition that he would leave the house and seek help for his homelessness. Reluctantly, the man agreed. Jessie helped him find a local shelter where he could receive assistance. In the end, Jessie couldn't forget the chilling discovery of a man living within the walls of her new home. But the experience left her with a renewed sense of empathy and a reminder that sometimes fear can be tempered with kindness and understanding. She hoped that the man she had encountered would find a way out of his difficult circumstances and that the two of them would never have to cross paths again.
Robert had always found Walmart to be a place of both fascination and eerie uncertainty. Late one chilly evening, he ventured into the sprawling store to pick up a few forgotten groceries. As he roamed the dimly lit aisles, he noticed an unfamiliar man who seemed to be watching him. Nervously, Robert paid for his items and quickly left the store. He couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger was following him. He decided to test his intuition and took a few unpredictable turns on his way home. However, with each twist and turn Robert took, he realized that the stranger was still behind him. Panic began to grip him and he knew he had to do something. He veered onto a deserted road and made a quick call to the police. Describing the situation, Robert received assurance that an officer would meet him at a nearby location. As he waited, beads of sweat formed on his forehead despite the cold. The stranger's presence continued to unnerve him. Minutes felt like hours as he stared down the dimly lit road. Finally, the flashing lights of a police car appeared, pulling up behind him. The officer approached Robert, and he quickly explained the situation. The officer assured him that they would resolve the matter and with a radio call, requested backup. Together, they devised a plan to confirm the stranger's intentions. They decided to keep driving down the road, leading the stranger further from Robert's home. The unrelenting stranger followed their every move, clearly determined to reach Robert's destination. As they turned onto a dark, isolated path, the police car's sirens blared, signaling other officers to close in. The stranger's car was surrounded and officers apprehended him. Robert felt a rush of relief knowing that he was now safe. The police questioned the man who turned out to be a private investigator hired to follow Robert. The shock of this revelation left Robert bewildered. He had no idea who would want to track his movements. They eventually uncovered that Robert's estranged family had hired the investigator, seeking to reconnect. The misunderstanding led to an intense, unsettling night, but it also brought about a strange and unexpected reunion.